Welcome to Side Alpha Leadership, a podcast where leaders can share their experiences and discuss what leadership means to them. I'm your host, David Polikoff. Hello and welcome to this month's Side Alpha Leadership. I'm your host, David Polikoff. On the call today, I have Dr. Captain Shelly Wheeler. She's been on the show a couple of times before. She currently is assigned to the training academy in the Washington metropolitan area, fire and rescue. I'll let her decide if she wants to tell you what county she works for, but all you got to really do is go back to the last couple of podcasts and you'll figure it out. So without rambling on, like I do, Shelly, welcome back to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me back. I always enjoy coming on. My name's Shelly Wheeler. Yes, I have a doctorate in business administration with a specialty in organizational leadership. I currently work for Montgomery County Fire Rescue. I'm a captain. I work at the training academy. Not more to add than the last couple times.
Right. So it's really good having you back on the show. I like your perspective on things. Plus, it's not often that I actually get a bona fide educated guest that's on here. A lot of times I have people that are specialties in their field, but it's nice to be able to bring somebody on the show that actually studied leadership and then sometimes kind of validates, when I say something and they say, yeah, you're right. It kind of makes me feel good. Like, hey, I'm like a broken watch. I'm right at least twice a day. But you bring a lot of good insight with our last couple of conversations that we've had. Not to mention that you've put me on track to a couple of really cool guests that have been on the show as well. Because for those that don't know, Shelly was in the Coast Guard. If you want to talk about that a little bit, that you had a good career in the Coast Guard. And I think you were doing that while you were still in the fire service, correct?
Well, I dabbled in the fire service, right? All I ever wanted to do was be in the fire department, be a paramedic. So I was a paramedic and I had went through the fire academy in Florida prior to enlisting in the Coast Guard. But I felt Florida did their hiring a little different. So I went through the state academy, passed that. And then I would have had to pass an agility to get onto a department. And I was pretty young and had a lot going on. So I decided I wanted to grow up a little bit before I really committed to the fire service. And then went on a 5-mile run one day and then went to the Coast Guard recruiter the next day. And the rest is history. So I did the 4 years in the Coast Guard and then immediately pursued a career in fire rescue when I came out.
We had you come out into the Washington, D.C. area and ultimately got hired in Montgomery County. And you've done good things since you've been there. How long you been in now?
22 years. 22 years, getting ready to not hiding anything here, getting ready to go in the drop soon so I can do something different when I grow up.
Yes, I'm looking forward to something different. And the cool thing is that, not only did you come into the fire service, you raised your family, you're married. You also went on to your education and then through higher education, graduate school, and you eventually got your PhD. It's been a little over a year now, correct?
Actually, believe it or not, it's been well over 2 years.
Oh,
yeah, time flies.
And come December, I will have been retired for 2 years. So. But, kudos for you. It's a lot that was on your plate, but you handled it successfully. So those out there that are listening, you're never too old to go to school. You're never too old to continue to learn new things and broaden your horizons. So, again, welcome back to the show. And like you and I talked about offline, there's a growing theme. There's issues that permeate the fire service. It doesn't matter where you are, coast to coast, north and south in the United States. Talk to some people over in England and that are in the fire service over there. They all bump into the same issues, and it comes. One of the things I want to talk about is morale, and it's so easy to have morale in the fire service go from pretty decent upbeat morale to morale just growing into the toilet on a turn of a dime. I mean, it happens so fast. In the fire service, that how you can be up, 1 week and then the next pay period, everybody's down. And it just seems that when we are in our lows in morale, it is it seems like it's a long time. So, a couple of things I want to touch on is, how do we break that cycle? How does the rank and file, the firefighters, the lieutenants, the captains, try to sturdy morale, make it good in their station, even if things around the county or around your system aren't going so good? And then what can leadership do, the management, the battalion chiefs, the assistants, the deputies, and the fire chief do to make morale at least a constant, and not a constant low, but at least an 80%, getting a high B in morale? How do we do that?
So the one thing that sticks out right away is what I call my 80% rule, right? I love that you said 80% because I think 80% is kind of the what we should at least strive for to get by on whether we're creating a new program or getting by on a day-to-day basis, right? Because what 80% tells all of us as leaders, followers, and I'll get into the leader-follower relationship, but is that we can always do better. So we should never think that we're operating at 100%. We should never strive to do that. As humans, we're imperfect, we're fallible. We're never really at 100%. But if we try to at least get to that 80%, it means we're always trying to maintain the 80% and get higher and higher. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's one of my things with organizational design and built some programs from the bottom up. And it's like, let's just get to the 80%, roll it out, learn what's going on, learn what's going well, what's not going so well, and how we can do better. So that's just like my first, lob that out to you.
Yeah, and I picked the 80%, not just out of the air, but I think that if we're working at 80%, I mean, we always strive for 100%, and it's difficult to get there, as human beings. But working at a good 80%, things are good. They're not perfect, but they're good.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we, as in the station life, take it for example, how does an officer keep his crew focused on the job? And we know that as firefighters, as officers, as people in the station, a lot is put on us, a lot of work, a lot of tasks that we're supposed to do. We are an all hazard company. We deal with all these issues, and COVID didn't help. That was a whole new thing that we had to learn as we're moving. We were literally, and somebody had said this, so I can't take credit for it. It's probably my wife because she's one of the smartest people I know. But you're literally building the ship as you're flying it. When it came to COVID, we just didn't know. And I know morale got pretty low because we had to almost fundamentally change the way that we did things in the station, how we ran calls, how we interacted with each other, until we got a better handle. So a lot of things are thrown on top of the rank and file, just with training, with classes, with policies, with the latest pandemic, politics, just personalities. How does an officer maintain that positive, upbeat morale when things feel like they're crashing around you?
So I go back to one of the things that I think is the simplest form to say what leadership actually is. And you get away from there's all these thoughts, there's all these books, there's all the great man theory, gods and generals, they led a war, so they must be great leaders, right? All these things, 65, 70 different leadership theories. And I go back to the simplest form of what leadership is, because we can all understand it because we're human beings, and it's the relationship. I know I say it ad nauseum, but it is about building a relationship. That's where it starts in the firehouse with the officer. And credibility is the foundation of leadership. And to have that credibility, you have to be competent and confident, because that's how people are going to trust you. And you're not going to be able to build that relationship without trust. I mean, we could all sit here and think about all our relationships in life, because we've all had them, good and bad. And as we learn, we know what what went well, what didn't go well. And as we grow and learn, we're like, oh yeah, well, don't do that again. So it's the same thing. That's the simplest form for an officer to engage with their crew and build that trust. And they build that trust through competence. And to be competent, that means you have to train, you have to be knowledgeable. One of the things, and I've pondered on this a lot, and I never thought about it, right? We talk about how important integrity is. And, integrity, a leader is doing the right thing when no one's looking. And then I co-authored an article with Frank Ricci, and he goes, well, I think about the only thing you and I disagree on is I think leadership is about doing the right thing when everyone's looking. And I'm like, well, that's leading by example. So the answer is it's both, right? So really, to lead in the firehouse, no matter who you are, you have to lead by example, walk the walk. When everyone's watching you, you have to do the right thing. You have to continue to do the right thing through integrity when no one's looking. I brought this up in a strategy and tactics class that I just taught in Montgomery. And this is, some of our youngest people getting ready to take that first step towards their very first promotion. And, we talked about our operational doctrine statement, and it's about crew resource management. It's about teamwork. It's about leadership. It's about all these things. And I was driving home the point of it doesn't matter. You have that 30-year captain, you're getting ready to, you show up on a house fire. They do an on-scene report. They report that, there's no walkout basement. Everything's clear. We're going in. And meanwhile, you're that most junior person and you never saw him do the circle check. And you learn through some fire behavior that there's smoke pushing out through the eaves and the roof vent. And you're going, well, wait a minute. Well, and then I said, well, what's that look like to you, right? What do you do? Do you follow this 30-year captain because you're just going to follow them blindly? Or do you see yourself as a leader and part of the crew and part of crew resource management and teamwork and say, hey, Cap, wait a minute, look at this. And, in order to do that, that person has to be empowered too, right? So I don't know if I'm rambling here, but to me, there's so much in this. You have to empower your people. You have to train them. You have to build confidence in them. You have to tell them what they're looking for. And then you have to be open to feedback from them too. And again, that's that whole communication, two-way communication. And two-way communication does not happen if you don't first stop and listen. We call it active listening. So again, it just goes back to being able to foster that relationship where you realize that you can't see everything and you can't do it yourself. And you need this crew and you need to empower that crew and they need to trust you and you need to trust them. And, that happens through building that relationship, building mutual trust. And we do that through training and communication. Meet people where they're at and take them where you need them to go. Right. So that's kind of where I'm at with that in a nutshell.
I agree with everything that you said. A couple of things that you said, I'm going to pick apart. The Frank Ricci comment. He and I, we've had that conversation before. About doing the right thing is leading by example and doing the right thing. When nobody's looking, that means you're always doing the right thing. You're not just putting on a show. But I also see his point is that you do the right thing when everybody's watching, like you said, setting the example. So not only are you setting the example, but you're also consistent. And consistency is huge when it comes to being a trusted leader in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I try to instill when I was a battalion chief in Montgomery, instill in my captains is, hey, everybody has a voice. I'm not perfect, far from it, and I miss things. And I heavily rely on the captains, lieutenants, and the firefighters to point things out that I miss. So I'm huge. I'm very adamant about everybody has a voice, and don't be afraid to speak up. I know there was a fire it was in Seattle and I can't remember exactly which one it was a handful of years ago, where a crew was going through the front door and the two went in, the officer and I think the lineman went in and they fell through the floor. It was a concrete floor and they died. They talked to the rookie and he had said he saw smoke coming through the cracks of the floor, but he didn't say anything because he felt that the officer who's seasoned, he has to have seen that. And who am I to point that out to him? Chances are that the officer probably didn't see that. So everybody has a voice. Don't be afraid to speak up, especially when we're working in an emergency situation. The other thing I try to tell the younger firefighters and the younger volunteers that are coming in where I'm working in Frederick now is don't be afraid to save your own life. If the officer says he's done something but he didn't and he's missed something, you have an obligation to speak up to save your own life as well as your crew's. We're huge in Frederick now of doing that 360 and making sure that it gets done, and that we challenge, or the battalion chiefs will challenge the first units on the scene if they're not giving the full initial on scene report or that full 360 report. They'll call them out, making sure that they're putting those pieces together. Yeah, it may sound like you're calling someone out on the radio, but the ultimate goal is we need you to hit all of those points in order to have that situational awareness. But getting back to what you said, when you have that lieutenant that's 30 years on the job, not as fast as they used to be. Let's be honest, we're all not as fast as we used to be. But you're running that box alarm or you're running those alarm bells, and that captain or that lieutenant is getting out of the front of the engine company or the front of the truck. They don't have all their gear on. They're not ready to go into a firefighting situation. And I've always told people, hey, that building is on fire until we say it's not. And you see it often that they're not ready to go inside of that burning building, or they're not ready to engage because they don't have all their gear on. They don't have their SCBA on. They cut corners. And then that kind of erodes your consistency, and ultimately it erodes the trust that you have with your people. And it also shows these younger guys, well, if the lieutenant and captain can do it, then I can do it. And now they're taking these bad habits as they move forward in their career to get promoted, that, hey, I can get away with this, or I can do the least amount. And, then we start breeding these mediocre at best fire officers.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you and I have talked about this before. Like it all starts with the why. And I think one of the things, and all these things, all of us, in this metro DC area, it's like, we have these policies. For us, it's our incident response policy, and it's whatever drives your policy, and it's we get on scene. And part of our acquired structure program that I push a lot is we got to get away from making box checkers and make decision makers. So what does that look like? Breathe, slow down a bit. The whole idea of our incident response policy, of that initial on-scene report, is the windshield assessment made to keep the butt in the seat. So you look and you look at just what you need for that moment to paint, a picture for the units coming down the road. And that situational update report is time for you to slow down. I mean, we have 4 people on an engine company now, which helps us a lot, right? It gives the officer time to breathe. The hose line's getting in place. You can do that circle check. But unfortunately, we're like, go, 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 go. And I feel like even command sometimes, like, on scene, give me a situational update report. Well, I haven't finished my 360. We have to learn to slow down and be. A 360 is not just walking around. A 360 is walking around, looking bottom to top and looking for those clues. Is there something coming out of the roof vent? Is there something coming out of the eaves? And making that good assessment, and then coming up with a good tactical plan. And to me, we're fighting our past of, get there, pull line to side alpha, go, 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 go. And it's like, well, what if it's not on side alpha? What if, I'm sorry, Dave, are you still there?
I am here.
Okay, I'm sorry, my screen timed out. I'm sorry for that. what if it's not on site alpha, and tying down, and then using that crew resource management, like, teaching people that, they're going to pull the line, they're going to be ready, we're going to look and communicate. You need to look too as the person pulling the line. You need to look as the driver. And it's something we're seeing in our program is, you're watching the drivers go out and take a look. You're watching the truck driver come and take a look, because we can't see everything ourselves. And that's that crew resource management. That's that teamwork. And that goes back to leadership and having those conversations and telling people why, because we know the big why is we know what's hurting us, right? So I was asked in acquired structure training, and we run it through a scenario base, and we dispatch them, and we run through a whole call, and then we role play the battalion chief coming in, and we just let them roll through. And I was asked, what is it that you all were looking for in this particular scenario? And I said, well, I had this epiphany. I'm like, well, let me tell you, it's far less like what we're looking for. We're looking for you to not do, however you want to look at it, is we should not be working over an uncontrolled fire. We shouldn't be working under an uncontrolled fire. We need to control the doors and stop the flow path. We need to do a systematic search, excuse me. And, we need to do a good solid circle check that we're looking high to low and looking all around. And when we do those things, we bring our risk profile down a good bit, because we know we're going through floors. We know the roof's caving in on us, because, we didn't take that time to stop and look. So that's kind of where I'm getting with the training and the why behind it. And because it's, I had a few people say, well, on a Mayday, you go. Well, yeah, you go, but you don't go. If you go in and go through the floor as well, you've done nothing to help the down firefighter. You still have to make that assessment and go with a good plan in place. And I mean, those are the conversations we have to have. That's where we got to have accountability. We got to talk about those hard things. We got to talk about that, the days of just running in the buildings, it hasn't really worked out well for us. I mean, we may have gotten lucky on some things, and those are hard conversations. But again, I think if you build that relationship, you talk about the morale. And one of the things I always told my guys in the firehouse is like, look, we can only control what happens in these four walls. So let's worry about what we're doing here. Let's worry about doing the right thing. Let's worry about training. Let's worry about taking care of each other. Let's worry about like our expectations of each other, and let's talk about that, and let's hold each other accountable for that.
I think you said a lot of stuff there that I want to touch on. The one thing you talked about, that windshield assessment, and that's what I used to drive into my guys. Like, look, these initial on-scene reports, your supplemental update or supplemental unit report, and then your 360. Those are three separate things. And that initial on-scene report, you are still sitting in the fire engine. You're looking through the windshield. You're looking at the whole building, and then you're giving that initial, that beginning on-scene report. From there, you should have already embedded expectations into your third and your fourth that's riding behind you. So they know that the 360 is coming. They don't have to follow you on the 360, but they should have the expectation of, well, what does the captain want me to do while they're doing a 360? Maybe it's, get your gear tightened up, make sure you're good to go. We clearly have a working fire. Chances are the line is going to be pulled to the front. So maybe that expectation is get the line shouldered and start moving towards the structure while that officer's doing a 360. I think the days of the officer barking out every single order are over. It's got to be chunks of orders prior to that call ever coming in. Hey, look, guys, when we get on the scene, if I don't say anything different, it's the cross lay, the 1 3/4, 1.5 inches to the front door, gear on, ready to go. All you should have to do is click your regulator in. You should be waiting on me. You should be yelling, come on, Cap, get your shit together. Let's go, let's go, let's go. That's the expectation. If I don't say anything, that's what I want. And that 360, it can't be a run. It has to be a fast walk, but it has to be, like you said, looking high and low, left and right, looking for the stairwells. What kind of basement is it? Does it have a basement? Do I have access to the basement? If I don't, might have to get on my hands and knees and look in the window, just to make sure that we're not going to be operating on a fire, an uncontrolled fire that's below us. Finish that 360, and then that next report that comes in is a more detailed report about the structure, given all four sides that we physically have seen. All that information is relayed back to all the units that are coming in, and then you take that command. So now communications has one entity to call, and that command is only going to be taken for a short period of time. One of the things that I did when I was working in the 1st Battalion, we'd get a 12 box over one of the high rises off of Lockwood or Oakleaf, and we're there pretty quick. So I'm right behind those guys. And I always told the captain, I said, hey, look, when you arrive on the scene, do your job. Give the initial on-scene report. Give whatever deviations from the policy you're doing. Call your water supply. Take the initial command. Just because I'm there, I'm not going to take it from you. That I have time now where I can actually write my units down on my tactical worksheet, take a look at the MDCs or anything that's updated, anything that I need to relay to the guys. Once I get settled in, get a good view of the building, then I can call my unit and get an LCAN if I have to, or if I physically see them walking through the door, unless they don't have any further information, then I can go ahead and assume that command. It was never go, 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 really, really fast. I'm on the scene. I got to get that command right away. You had to get in the mindset that it's a policy-driven fire department. If the policies if the policies don't need to be deviated from, then chances are it's a policy-driven incident. So with that being said, all the units that are responding have a job to do. So when you arrive on the scene first, nobody's beating you on the scene because you're there. You can take that time to make sure you're doing the right thing. The second due engine knows what they're supposed to do. The third, the fourth, the fifth, they know what they're doing. The first two trucks know what they're doing. So if it's the expectations are to follow the policy, then there's no reason to rush and cut corners. There's no reason to feel that you are behind the 8 ball tactically wise when you arrive on the scene. So it's good to take that breath, to get the bigger picture of what's going on, make sure you get that 360 done, and relay all that information. Load all that information up for that incoming incident commander so they can start making decisions based on the information that they're giving them. That's how I always viewed it when I was running as an incident commander. And that's the way I feel that these captains and lieutenants should be. Don't feel like you have to be rushed. Just because the chief's there doesn't mean that he's pushing you through the front door. The chief, a good chief, wants you to gather as much information as you can, and they want you to be able to make decisions based on the information that you have. Now, granted, it's not going to be perfect, so that's where our experience has to come into play. Where we're going to be making decisions based on the bits of information that we have, and that plan is constantly evolving and moving. We're massaging it. We're making different decisions or building on those decisions based on more information that we get. That sound about good for you?
No, it sounds really good to me. And I think, that is that's it. That's the leadership piece, right? Like you communicated that with your captains and lieutenants. That's where it starts, right? It starts with that going around the firehouse, sitting around, because we there's not a checkbox for everything, and there's no one way to do things, and there's always those shades of gray that we deal with. And to be able to communicate with your officers as a battalion chief and say, hey, here's my expectations, here's what I'm going to do, because it's important for us to slow down. I mean, of course, we're not talking about a snail's pace. I mean, we are moving, we are being purposeful, but we're not talking about 5 minutes. We're talking about a couple extra seconds to make a good, at least, decision for initial tactics. And I always say that battalion chief's there to bail us out and see the bigger picture, right? Like we're all tacticians on the fire ground. Now, our job as company officers is to go and say, I see this, I do this. Your job as the battalion chief is to look at the bigger picture and make sure that our tactics match what your strategy is. And we have to communicate that. The more we talk about it up front, the more we communicate our expectations, the more we talk about like, hey, chief, I felt like you were really pushing me on that. Like, I need time to come around. So if you don't hear from me, don't punk me out on the radio and go, I said I need an L-can. If I am not ready to give you an L-can, you got to give me a few, right? And where does that come from? It comes from having a conversation. It talks about, we shouldn't be afraid to talk to each other. I shouldn't be as afraid as a captain to talk to my battalion chief, right? And as it goes up the chain, we get so much into this hierarchy. It's like, oh, I can't talk freely. Well, if we can't talk freely, we really don't know what the expectations really are, because everything else is just written on black and white and paper, but we don't know. It's shades of gray. We could run 5 houses that look absolutely identical, and the call's not going to go the same, right? It's not going to be the same call ever, because there's always going to be this one, even if it's one little thing, it's different. And we saw this. I thought it was kind of neat. My analytical mind with acquired structures, we give a very basic scenario in our acquired structure scenarios. We then role play to how the officers and the crews make decisions. So every scenario that we have run has been different, because no one does the same thing. And so we react to what the decisions they're making on the fire ground. And then we talk to them about that. And then we talk about, well, why? What were you thinking? And it really engages people and opens up that conversation of, the why, so we can all understand, because it's not that it's wrong. And we've seen so many good things. I've learned so much. I learn something every time. But I think it drives home, at least my belief, I think it drives home my point of, that's why you have to have those conversations. You have to have those conversations every time, because we can assume something. We could say, oh, that was a terrible idea. Well, but this is why I did it. Oh, I would have never thought of that. I didn't know that happened. No, you didn't, because you didn't ask me. So now I'm telling you why I made that decision. And we can all learn so much from that. It's just been really, really cool to watch that. And it's been really amazing. And people have really embraced it. And it's created, like, talking about building morale. Like, there might be some people that don't want to get off their butts and train, but I'll tell you, going through acquired structure and bringing people out, and, we have it's like 10 to 15 minutes and they're through it. And then we help them clean up and we hot wash, and then we just talk about things. And it always reminds me of how I view the Hawthorne effect. And there's a lot of scholars that try to tear it apart and everything else. But basically, back in the 1920s, 1924, Second Industrial Revolution, they were doing this study on if light would increase productivity. And I'll keep this really short. And so they went around and they would talk to people who were working in the dark, and they'd talk to people that were working in the light. Well, eventually, they realized that it didn't matter, that if they were in the dark or in the light, productivity increased. So to me, this is a simple lesson in leadership and people skills, and why when we engage, it's so important to engage people to build morale, and give them a seat at the table, because productivity went up. It didn't matter. So it was kind of deduced. It wasn't a perfect study. It was like one of those things. That's not even what they were studying. It was just an unintended outcome. Productivity went up because, people like to feel like they're heard. People like to feel like they're part of a team. And when they do, it increases productivity and it increases positive behaviors. No, we know not always. Nothing's 100%. There's just some people, the stubborn people, you'll never lead them. They don't want to be led. But for the majority, knowing that they have a seat at the table, telling your fire 2 or fire 3, hey, why don't you put together a training? Hey, I want you to do the training. You're doing really good. You're really good at this, as the officer. And I've done this. Hey, you're really good at this. I want you to do a drill on this. Or maybe something they're not so good at. But hey, look, let's do it. I'll help you out with it, because then it helps them get better at it, right? Like, we got to empower people to do things. And I think that that's a natural morale booster. And I feel like anyone in Montgomery would, agree with this. Like, They go out, they train, it's quick, it's one and done. It's with respect that they've got so many other things to do, but they want to train, they feel engaged. It helps them talk to their crew about how they would do things. Some of the battalion chiefs are coming out and doing the same thing. And, before you know it, you have a bunch of people that are communicating with each other, building respect amongst each other, building more trust, and bam, you kind of just got this more positive environment around you, right? At least that's the way I see it.
One of the things I want to talk about, you had mentioned about decisions and making decisions, and I'd had a kitchen table talk with a couple of battalions when I was working in Montgomery over a few months, and one of the questions I had asked is, why are people afraid to make decisions? So people have heard that story 1,000 times. I've told it, so I'm not going to get into that. But what I want to ask you is, how do we train people to make decisions? How do we get better at making decisions? And one of the things that I constantly talk about on this podcast is we don't set our officers up, and for the most part in the fire service, we don't set our officers up to be officers. It's like you're a fire 3, you're riding 8 on the ambulance, or 3rd on the engine company behind the captain. You get off that morning, you take your lieutenant's test, you score well qualified, you're number 1 on the list. A week later, you're the lieutenant. So you went from riding back step to the front seat. The only training that you get, unless it's changed in Montgomery County, is you get 5 days of officer candidate school, or whatever that they're calling it. But you and I both know that you can't teach somebody to be that lieutenant in 5 days. Now, hopefully, they have been watching their officer and kind of getting that on the job training, but that varies from station to station and officer to officer. You could be at a station that only runs 2 calls a week, or an officer that's like past his prime and is just retired in place. Officer, they're already gone. They've already checked out. But they're just going through the motions. So what do we do? How do we encourage, or how do we teach, and then how do we encourage our new officers to make decisions, or even before they become officers? How do we teach somebody to make decisions, and make them feel that the decisions that they're making, even though they're not perfect, we can get there? Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense. I have an entire dissertation built on it. That no one's ever going to read, right? Like, unless you just, if you ever think you're going to read it, just, pull out the middle of the nuts and bolts of it, of what the study was of 4 large metro fire departments. Because, it's there, the trust, the confidence, the competence, all those things of what makes, how people view a fire service leader. But one of the parts of my study was like to build effective leaders. And that means effective leaders, decision makers. It has to be a building block approach. And I don't know if you and I have really gotten into this before, because I feel like, we could talk forever about this stuff, right? But it starts at the beginning, right? It really does start in the academy, of giving them the right things. I mean, first, an organization has to figure out exactly what they want their people to know. What is the definition of leadership for your department? And you can define that. Frederick can define that. Montgomery can define it. Like, here are the core values. Here's what we think is a leader. And you communicate that with them, and you teach them that, right? You start in the academy, and then, we went to strategy and tactics, and I've talked to Chief Sanford about this, and Chief Gibson, is what we're starting to do is build into our programs. So strategy and tactics. So from strategy and tactics, and we're going to start teaching up the Fire Officer 4. We don't need it in Montgomery, but we're going to start to do it. We're going to put our own pieces in there, and we're going to tell people, like, so for human resources, this is what you need to know. For leadership, this is how we define a leader, and do it. And you just give them this in these pieces as they come up. And then, you back that up with, like for Maryland Fire Rescue Institute, they're like, here's these classes, here's the coursework you need to do, here's the PTIs that you need to do. But we can take those and do the very same objectives and then put our own information in it. We got to give them the information. We got to teach them. And when we can systematically figure out what the total message is we want to send, that will be a huge step, right? I talked to Steve Mann about that today, Battalion Chief Steve Mann. He and I were talking about it today of like, what do we want the message to be? You have to start with that clear cut message. We have a vision and mission, but we have core values. And I just taught a fire officer 2 class. I said, tell me our 3 core values. And they struggled, right? Well, because our core values changed within our career. So if we're going to make a change, you got to communicate that change. You got to communicate it. You got to tell them why it's important. You got to educate them on it. And then you got to train them on it. And then you put it into everything. If we want to increase our ability to make good risk-based decisions, we come up with this pretty simple risk analysis profile that we can do. And then we teach it and everything. And we talk the same language. And then we're all on the same page eventually. Organizational change, organizational redesign, organizational change is not as complicated as we make it. I mean, we could argue, people would argue with me, and I would vehemently argue back that if you align it correctly, you can make these changes. So you have to communicate what that is. You have to communicate what it is that you want, what the values are, what the expectations are. Again, this goes back to what we talked about with communication, right? And then you just bake it into everything you do. If there's 5 levels of promotion, you bake it in. It's kind of like the same thing, right? Like you say, like from, let's say, strategy and tactics to fire officer 4, you're pretty much using the same concepts. You just bring it up and you change the way that you teach the concepts and what the exercises are that you do, based on their experiences. As the experience increases, then maybe you give them case studies and get feedback and stuff like that. But to me, and I don't know, maybe I oversimplify everything, but it's not really that complicated. That's some things that you can do that then by the time that they get up to that lieutenant level, then when they get to that point, and then you put them through COLA, and then you let them ride the front seat, they've already heard all these things. It's just kind of a building block approach, if that makes sense.
Hello, and welcome to this month's Side Alpha Leadership. I'm your.
Are you there?
Yep, we had a little bit of technical difficulty, but
Okay.
we're good.
Okay.
So keep going.
Yeah, well, I just don't know if what I'm saying makes sense. Just that building block, filling in each level with what it is that you want them to know, and just keep building on it. So you're not trying to jump in there and cram in everything into a officer candidate school. Like, okay, what are we going to teach them now? What are we going to teach them now? Well, you're giving them all new concepts that they didn't even have some kind of basic understanding of. How much are they going to retain, and how much is that going to help them at that point?
Yeah, and I've talked, at great ad nauseum about, officer candidate school, and are we failing our budding lieutenants or the officers? Are we putting them behind the 8 ball? So, I've always asked, well, what would that look like? I mean, 5 days is not an officer candidate school, but maybe the answer is the day that they get off probation, after they got that year on, we start training our firefighters to be decision makers, to start working towards being an officer, almost like a succession planning, putting those new people, giving them the vision of what their career is going to look like if they decide to go down the path of being an officer. And even if they decide not to be an officer, we've armed them with the tools to be decision makers. And that's huge, especially if your firefighter, your master's driving you on the engine of the truck, and you guys can pull information from each other about the incident, about the structure, what we see. You can talk tactical and strategic on a level that you're both operating on the same level because you've been trained to that. Even if you decide not to be an officer, you're still operating at that level. So now your officer candidate school goes from 5 days to maybe 5 years because it's continual on the job training. So maybe what that looks like is that the training academy would continually send out information about leadership, about decision making, about communication, about trust, building relationships, things like that. Giving those bits of information out monthly for everybody to read, just little short stories. So at that way, we're building our organization up to be the future leaders, whether they decide to or not. Does that make sense?
That makes 100% sense to me. Like that was the gist of it, right? And I think there's some things, and I've gotten a lot of support on it, right? That was part of revamping these programs. I mean, I started, in this last strategy and tactics class with telling everyone in that class, you are a leader. If you think you're not a leader, you are shortchanging yourself. You got to be a leader. You got to be a decision maker. We're taking you out of the academy and we're putting you in the front seat of an ambulance, and you're not always going to have an officer with you. And you're going into this house in someone's worst day of their life, and you are wearing the patch. You are representing Montgomery County Fire Rescue, or insert any other department out there. We should not be stripping them from the thought that they are a leader. They are a leader. They are a leader at a certain level with a certain amount of experience, and they need to take that and embrace that and continue to learn. And they're going to learn that as they move up in their career. And it's the department and the officers and the chief officers' jobs to make sure that we are getting them up there and they're getting the proper message. So part of, Chief Sanford really started supporting me on this earlier. And, Chief Gibson has come in now, and he's just 100% on the same vision of, we need to wrap this all together, right? We need to be selling this message in our courses, in our training, insert acquired structure training. We're doing a micro video library where, nothing more than 10 minutes, but, we're giving it to the companies. Go out, create your videos. What does the department need? And we're trying to sell that same message, to your point of what that looks like, what we're looking for, a consistent message. What does leadership look like in Montgomery County Fire Rescue? What does risk management? Risk management is something we've been throwing around for a while. We'll see where it goes. It's not a hard concept. It can be taught very simply. We do it, but we say it. But it's like a lot of things we do in the fire service, it becomes a buzzword. There's some actionable things that we can do to make it part of who we really are. Situational awareness. None of these things need to be buzzwords. We can educate people on it, explain to them what it is, why it's important, and how they can achieve it, and how everyone has a stake in the game, right? Safety is everyone's responsibility, right? But, through hierarchy, we tend to squash people and think through hierarchy that they shouldn't say something, which goes back to our earlier point of, yes, say something. And I'm seeing it happen again. I hate to keep going back to acquired structures, but we've just learned so much, myself, the instructors there. It's amazing. If you sit back and you go, oh, and I think we all do this as a department, it's like, oh my gosh, maybe morale doesn't look good. Maybe this doesn't look good, or that doesn't look good. And then you go out and you do a training program like that, and you see the people that you work with. There has been such an immense level of pride from my point of view and from the instructor point of view. Like, man, our people are good. They just need that spark. Again, it's bringing them in. It's having that conversation. It's sharing what we have with each other. It's just kind of been amazing. And when you have all these programs that build off of that and sell a consistent message, I think it helps raise up a department and raise up morale. I think it's when the message is inconsistent or people don't think they're being communicated with that they get frustrated. And that's why morale can change so quick, I think. Just my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that. you're getting back to, setting these firefighters up on a path to be, officers, to be, be the lieutenants, to be the captains, your acquired structure program. You don't necessarily have to light fires in these acquired structures to achieve an outcome. And what I mean is, instead of putting the captain or the lieutenant in the front seat, take that fire three and say, you're riding up front right now, and we're going to run a house fire, and you're in charge. And see how they operate. And then that allows the officer who may be riding in the back now uh, to hear what their firefighters doing, to see what their firefighters doing, to see how they're going to lead the crew. And it also allows the academy staff to kind of take a step back and look and say, is this firefighter capable of being an officer right now? And if the answer is no, what are we missing? What is this person missing? And then you can say, okay, so what they've gotten in training and everything, and the years that they have on up to now is this. We also need to add this, because we need them to be able to operate in a manner that if the officer does go down in a fire, they can make a call and make things happen. You listen to a lot of these podcasts out there where they're talking to these, the armed forces special operators. Everybody that's on that team, that platoon or whatever, is capable of making a call. Yeah, the officer might be making the call, but if that officer goes down, somebody has to be there to step up to make a call, to maneuver the crew or maneuver that unit to either continue with the fight or to pull back. So I think that we should have something like that in the fire service, to where everybody's capable of making the right call or making that right decision. We just have an officer there that's going to do that. But when that firefighter goes to take their test and they pass and they get on the list and they go from firefighter in the back to officer up front, they're already armed with the tools, the rudimentary tools, to make decent decisions and progress as they move forward and gain experience.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that needs to always be the ultimate goal. I think that's why when I stand in front of some of these young people and teaching a class or whatever, just talking to them at acquired structures, or wherever I'm talking to them, it make that point that you have to be a decision maker. You have to be a leader. You have to see yourself that way. You may not have all this vast experience, but you never know. We never know how the environment's going to change and what's coming next. And I think one of the things too that drove it home more for me, we had the IAFF come out and do a train the trainer for fireground survival, and just the way that they trained everybody there, and they trained on a very, and I think this is really kind of what you and I are talking about too, is they were very consistent on that basis, that foundation. Like this is backed with studies. This is backed by science and studies and behaviors of how we operate on the fire ground and in a Mayday situation. It was based on Project Mayday. So they came up with this very consistent way to handle different things. And it was funny, like I'm watching, because I had, kind of with the help of the chiefs and everything, put this program on. So I'm walking around as a program manager and I'm looking, and everyone had and we had departments from all around participating. And, people are like, yeah, well, I said, I saw this and so we tried it this way. And they would consistently sell the message. I get it, but we are teaching you this way. This is the way you need to teach it, right? Because they're giving them that basic foundation. When it hits the fan, you cannot say, well, I tried it 15 different ways. It was this one way. We were consistent about it. And my point of it, and where I said, this is exactly why this is so important. They were giving them the foundation that we should train like we play, because when it goes down and you're panicked and everyone is losing themselves. One of the things they teach is you got to take a breath. You got to take a breath and you got to save yourself. And you got to think about what that looks like. So you got to, like, the same basic thing every time, train this. Stop thinking that, as firefighters, we love all the cool stuff. We love the gadgets and whatever. And it's like, do it this way. Yeah, but we could do it this way and we could do it this way. Yes, but when it hits the fan, we have to have this standard way. And I think that's what I'm talking about with training too. Like, if we have this building block approach and we have this really strong foundation that it started on, whatever those foundational principles are, leadership, risk management, conflict resolution, the basics of, because let's face it, everything we're talking about here is all a human response, right? Like, it's how we operate. It's how we communicate with each other. It's how we communicate on the fire ground. It's how we make decisions. It's how, and we got to be able to do that. So there's these very basic things. And if we could stick to those basic things and give people from start to finish that this is how we're going to do it, by the time they go from that firefighter in the back seat up to the front seat, it's not like, I'm a fire 3 one day, in Montgomery, and I'm a lieutenant the next day. We need to have them ready for that transition. A 5-day class isn't going to cut it, especially when the 5-day class is, what do we want to do this time? Let's get a group together. What do we want to do this time? Then it just breeds inconsistency. Oh, I had this in my COLA class. I had this in my COLA class. Or me, I never had a COLA class. I watched, I trained, I took a lot of responsibility on myself because I just wanted to be the best I could be. Some people do it, some people don't. I didn't have a choice. I was petrified that now I'm in charge and I'm leading people in and I am responsible for them. I don't want to do anything stupid. Right. And there was just no program for me. So anyway, I had a lot of other experience to fall back on. So I was grateful for that.
I think as an officer, to set your people up for success in the future, I think it goes a long way if the officer were to just, when they're out doing whatever, they're out riding around, they're on the air, they're looking at buildings or whatever, to turn to the firefighters and say, what do you think about this? Tell me what you're thinking. What would you do in this situation? And have that officer solicit the information from the firefighters and then truly listen to their answers. And that should be able to allow that officer to key in on things that we need to work on. Pull up to a townhouse, middle of the road townhouse. Let's say this townhouse is on fire. It's 2:00 in the morning. Status of the occupants are unknown. There's fire coming out of the two second floor windows. Most likely, you might have 1 or 2 rooms off. What are you thinking? What are you going to do? Mm-hmm. What would you do if you were the officer? What would you say? Give me an on-scene report and allow those firefighters to go through that motion. And if you do that every shift, it starts to become more comfortable for them to make decisions, to talk on the radio, to size up a structure. So when they truly have to do it, when they get promoted into that position, it's not the first time that it's happened. And I think maybe that's how I answer my question of what's the perfect officer candidate school. Well, because of funding and budgets and the inflation and lack of money, maybe the perfect officer candidate school is ongoing on-the-job training all the time by the lieutenants and captains to their people on their individual shifts. Maybe it won't be consistent throughout the county, but at least you got the gears turning in these firefighters' heads to have at least the fundamental building blocks of making decisions, being able to size up a structure, being able to size up an emergency situation. Hell, you run a crash, a car accident, and maybe it's not too serious. Turn to the firefighter and said, "You're in charge. Here's the radio. You run it." I got to do that as a captain. When one of my firefighters, Christy First, she's a battalion chief now. She was one of my master firefighter paramedics in Station 23. When she got on the lieutenant's list, I was like, "You're riding the front seat." My only rule was make sure you do your reports because I don't want to get in trouble. and I rode in the back. And
Yep.
I had people do that for me when I was a young firefighter. When I was trying to become a master, and they would allow me to ride the front seat and make decisions. That is good. That is good on the job training. And then you go back and you hot wash. What could you have done better?
Hmm.
You take that fear away that it's not the first time you ride in the front seat. So maybe the perfect officer candidate school is that constant on the job training from the time you get off probation, and you are grooming people to become officers, whether they become officers or not.
I I can't. I think yes. I mean, and I think that's kind of my point of, you know, we have to train that, and we have to instill that as our officers come up too. And I had the same thing. I had someone, I was very lucky because I got the ride to front seat with someone behind me, and I got to make mistakes, and I got the feedback. And you know, everyone doesn't get it, but these things can be so simple. Again, we can take our Menfrey programs, and from an academy standpoint, we can inject the things we think is important, you know. And it's a lot of how our programs run now. We do a lot of scenario based stuff, even in Fire Officer 1 and Fire Officer 2, and there's a lot of conversational feedback of what it means to be a leader and all those things. And you can do that, and then you train your officers to train people, let them move up. I mean, it's one of the things I said at Acquired Structures, like, look, if you're getting sent back, and we miss you out, you know, off the radar, you've already come, you know, first of all, we have more than one scenario, but put whoever in the front seat. I've talked to some officers. I'm like, hell, put your rookie up there. Let them see what it is, because it's not to, you know, go in and put them in the hot seat. It's them to, they're now going to understand what your job is like. And I definitely saw that, like being a command competency dispatcher, and you know, working with you know, the chief certification officer, you know, certifying chief officer program, and then I'm on the battalion chief's list. So you know, you start to see why a battalion chief is asking you certain things. You know, from me at a captain level, like, you know, and I kind of understood this because I had a really great battalion chief. I mean, Chief Pezos was awesome. Like I could sit down and talk to him and go like, and he's like, hey, on that one, I was really looking for this. Like, you can't just say, fires out, put everyone in service. You can't do that. So why can't I do that? Because what is the responsibility that that battalion chief has on the back end as the command officer? That's not enough information, right? And so those are really important conversations, and it's really important to understand why, like, put yourself in someone else's shoes, I guess is what I'm saying. And by what you're talking about doing that, you know, you can put someone in your shoes and go, oh, well, I don't ever want to be an officer. You know what I mean? And there's some people that make those decisions, and that's okay. But at least they can be a really important part of the team, and they understand where you're coming from and why, and they can help you make decisions, and they can help you see things that you're going to miss. Because, you know, 4 sets of eyes, 3 sets of eyes are way better than 1 set of eyes.
Absolutely. And believe it or not, we are at the over 1 hour mark. So I could talk about this stuff all day, and then the podcast would be like 4 hours long, and nobody would listen to it, or at least have to break it up under multiple rides to and from work. But Shelly, I appreciate you coming on the show. I always enjoy your insight to leadership, and what you have learned, and then how you can break it down into simplest terms for the fire service to grasp and move forward with. And you know, I appreciate you coming on the show, making the show that much better, making me sound smart. That's the important thing, is that you made me sound smart. I get smart guests on here. So with that, again, truly appreciate you coming on here. It's always a conversation that it goes back to, is, you know, how do we make our firefighters into good officers? How do we make our officers better? I think that this bleeds over into the real world. I think the training and the experiences and the calls that we run, the things that we've been faced with, give us an edge over most people, I want to say, in the real world or the business world, or outside of public service, of the decision making. I think it's funny when you hear business people talking about the decisions that they have to make, and you know, I always want to say, yeah, but did you die? because
Right.
some of the decisions we make could be bad. But anyway, again, Shelly, I appreciate you coming on the show, and thank you for giving a little bit of insight into morale, trust, relationships, and communication.
All right. Thanks for having me. And I promise you are really smart.
Take care of yourself.
You too. We'll
Bye.
see you soon. Take care. Bye.
Thanks for listening to this month's Side Alpha Leadership. You can reach us on the web at www.sidealphaleadership.com. We're on social media, on Instagram at Side Alpha Leadership, on Twitter at Leadership Side, and on Facebook for Side Alpha Leadership.